The 1st of October 2005 was a really big day at Narromine Airfield. The Curtis P40 you see here is actually Cole Pay's, and it was fresh out of a full restoration in his hangar at Scone, and Cole actually used it to commute down to Narromine to fly the Wright Flyer. Several thousand people turned up. There certainly were some dignitaries there. Buzz Aldrin and his wife. Buzz was the man who stayed in the lunar orbiter while the other two, Armstrong and the other two, went down to onto the moon. But Buzz was there and had quite a few words to say, and it was very interesting to see that a man who was involved in the first flight to the moon was present at the first flight after 90 years of the replica Wright Flyer. Quite a few warbirds turned up. This is a replica Zero, which was built out of a T6 Texan. It looks very much like a Zero and is used in air shows as a Zero with the meatball rising sun emblem there on the side of the fuselage. And there are a couple of DC-3s. There were a number of other warbirds and a huge number of general aviation and vintage aircraft. The Wright created a huge amount of interest on the part of the general public, and there were a large contingent of media there. The Wright Flyer is very interesting. It was designed, drawn up by Bill Whitney, who researched everywhere from the Smithsonian Institution through to a number of other sources in order to get the dimensions and the overall size of the aeroplane as accurate as possible. And speaking of size, it's really quite a large and bulky aeroplane. It's got a wingspan of 41 feet, a length of 29 feet, and if you like, you can convert that to metric if you like, but the original Wright was designed in imperial, so that's the way I'll quote it. The propellers were made by Dick Sweetapple from Brisbane, and they're a huge 10-foot 6 diameter, and they turn at about 300 revs per minute, as you will see. The engine in the Wright, it was also very interesting. It's a 1950s Coventry Climax engine out of a Hillman Imp motor car. Slightly modified, but basically the alloy Coventry Climax was the engine that drove it. More about that in a minute. The undercarriage was also changed from the Wrights. The Wrights flew off rails with the skids that you see here. But because of tarmac conditions, etc., it was necessary to put wheels on the aeroplane. So a four-wheeled undercarriage axle system was fitted to the bottom of the skids. There's Buzz Aldrin, by the way, having a few words to say. His wife slightly in the background. Bill Whitney was also there, along with Denise's wife and a large number of other people. The project was undertaken by Eric Hayden and his father Keith and the Hayden family, and effectively Bill Whitney and Eric and his father and Eric's mother, who did all the sewing on the fabric, and a small number of other volunteers actually put this aircraft together at Narromine. A remarkable undertaking when you consider all that was required. And Bill tells me that he did a huge amount of work on the design of the airframe. Every single last fitting has to be drawn up and designed and stressed and measured and certified. And there's Cole getting aboard, not really showing any nerves, and with Cole's 30-odd thousand hours of experience, I don't think you'd really expect him to. I had a few words to say to him after the flight, and he said that it was, I said, how was flying it? He said it was interesting, he said. And you'll see in just a moment when the aircraft starts to taxi that it had no steering because of the four wheels. So Cole just moved down the taxiway, and when he needed to correct the course of the aeroplane, he simply slowed down, and some people grabbed the nose and lifted it across to the new heading. There she goes, underway for the first time. She rolled quite easily on the wheels, and you could see just how slowly those huge propellers run. Dick Sweetapple said it was certainly the largest propellers he's ever built, even though he built the props, the four-bladed props for the Vickers-Vimy replica that again Bill Whitney designed back in the early 1980s for Lang Kidby to fly from England to Australia. And in fact, Dick Sweetapple designs the propellers for all of my Sparrow and Sparrowhawk range of aircraft. Now there's Cole just slowing down. A couple of guys have run out, they're lifting the nose of the aeroplane across so that she stays on the centre line, and he just opens the throttles and moves off again. Now she's not actually running through the weeds there, obviously that would be impossible. There's a taxiway on the other side. Now this is the first time a Wright Flyer has lifted off the ground anywhere in the world for 90 years. Quite a remarkable sight. The aeroplane is quite stable laterally, Cole said. He didn't have to use the wing warping very much at all. She's quite stable in yaw, but she's divergently unstable in pitch. And in fact, because the elevators are in front, effectively this is a canard aircraft, because the elevators are in front and are all flying, if you push them together forward too far, in other words, if you give too much down elevator, the aeroplane will tuck under and dive straight into the ground. So that's something that Cole had in mind and watched very carefully. Now he was so happy with the first flight that he taxied back and he did it again. Quite remarkable. The aeroplane, you can see, he's a little more used to her here. He gets her up to speed and she lifts off quite gently, and there she goes now, just lifting off, just almost elevating off the ground. Now she came off the ground at about 22 knots. She cruised between 30 and 40 knots, but the Wrights reported that if the aircraft was taken beyond 60 knots, it became absolutely, totally uncontrollable. So you certainly kept the speed down. But a remarkable achievement on the part of Bill Whitney, the designer, of the Hayden family, and all of the volunteers at Narromine in getting it together and in raising the funds that it took to build this aircraft. The engine, by the way, has a jack shaft from the clutch, which acted as a damper, to a mixing gearbox, which contra-rotated the propellers, but which also had a differential in, so that if a chain broke or for any reason one of the propellers stopped driving, the other one would stop driving instantly, because the last thing you wanted was asymmetric thrust on the Wright Flyer. You would immediately be into the ground. The crowd were hugely appreciative. There were a lot of speeches afterwards, and generally it was a wonderful day. And fortunately, I have to say, not unusual for Narromine, but the weather was extremely kind to us, because if it had blown hard at all, it would have been impossible to fly the aircraft. You can see there the standard to which the replica was built. That's the fuel tank, by the way, clamped in a couple of pieces of wood, and the little Hillman Imp engine lent herself ideally to the purpose, because Coventry Climax, as a lot of people will know, built some of the very early racing engines in England. They were originally fire pump engines, and they were made lightweight for that purpose, but they lent themselves ideally to racing because they were twin overhead cam, and also to the little aeroplane. And that little engine gave no trouble at all right through the entire flying procedure. So a huge achievement on the part of everybody involved, much excitement, a record which can never be broken. No Wright Flyer had flown in the world, as I said, for the previous 90 years. I think one has flown, in Belgium since, but it flew very briefly, and there have been 2 or 3 attempts to replicate the Wright Flyer's first flight in 1903 and 2003, which unfortunately ended in the aircraft crashing. So there it is, the flight of the Wright.